The time has come.
Ignored. The Tion Cluster, once the center of power in the galaxy during Xeen the Despot's reign, had been ignored, with squabbling factions vying for territory in the aftermath of their leader's death. The region had become nothing more than a backwater for the last 1,000 years, and had been broken up into several factions. The strongest would be the honorable union of Desvro and Tion, formed from the throne world of Desvro, and ruled by an oligarchy composed of 37 noble families on the planet. The union was attempting to become the next ruling power in the Tion Cluster and beyond. But this changed with the Republic, when they blazed the trail from Coruscant to Ossus, and incidentally reunited with the Jedi Order since the time of the Unification War. They had become little more than a myth until that time. After all, this was before the First Great Skirmish, and allowed for Slay of the Force to become more available to the Republic, thus creating an alliance between the two. Yet this course of action would have devastating consequences for the Tion Cluster, as the Hutts panicked. The Krillin Reaches, the true stronghold of Zin's power, it had been left alone by the Hutts since the death of Zin the Despot. Of course, the Hutts would raid various worlds for slaves and the like, but otherwise, the worlds were left alone, and able to live with autonomy from the Hutt Empire. This was primarily due to acting as a buffer between the Hutts and the Tion Cluster. That was until 24,500 BBY. Ironically enough, at the same time of the First Great Skirmish, when the Jedi Republic could do nothing to stop it, and massive tragedy occurred. You see, the Hutts had become paranoid. They feared that if a mere human such as Zim could forge such a powerful empire that nearly destroyed them, they had to be on their toes about every human power. Thankfully, the Tion Cluster was the only source of human might in the Outer Rim. Then came the Republic. This was a bad situation. You know how in stories there's always that older species or power that sees the development of younger nations and just ignores them, considers them trivial? Yeah, the Hutts aren't stupid. While they don't particularly see humans as right, they did recognize humans outnumbered them to a vast degree. Even with their empire, with 3 new species under their control and various other slave races, they lacked the force in numbers to even hope to combat the humans if the Republic and the Tionese were to make an alliance. And if the Tionese had told them what the Hutts did to Zim, well, it'd get very uncomfortable very fast. So the Hutts did the one thing that they considered justifiable. And no, this isn't the noble bright nonsense of Star Trek. This is Star Wars, just a couple of steps above Warhammer 40k. So you can imagine the response: extermination.
Exterminate! Not like this.
They took preemptive action and just laid waste to the Krillin Reaches, wiping out every last man, woman, and child they encountered. And then they made it worse. They didn't just destroy people or wipe out entire civilizations, they irradiated whole worlds so nothing could grow back. They would be useless and lifeless for all time. The Hutts went so far that they destroyed or towed away the hyperspace beacons that Zim built, so that way there's only a single invasion corridor remaining, the Warrior's Trace. And you can only imagine just how much firepower they concentrated in that area. I am not even joking when I say this. You could throw a Yuuzhan Vong world ship into that hyperspace lane. Even at that time, it would end up being reduced to rubble in seconds. The destruction of the Krillin Reaches was so complete, so comprehensive, that even during the time of the early Galactic Civil War, thousands of years later, those who studied the legends of Zim could not connect the event to the aftermath. Instead, they believed it was a series of astronomical events, such as multiple supernovae happening at once, for it to make sense. This event was known as the Devouring, and it didn't disappoint. The Krillin Reaches would be known by another name after that, probably one you were familiar with, the Ash Worlds, because there was nothing left. Just a distant memory remembered by the Tionese as a winter religious holiday, a mockery of what actually occurred. Now you're probably wondering, why the hell am I bringing up an event that's 500 years removed from the current situation? Simple: context. Because what happens next is due to that. As previously established, the Tion Cluster was in a state of perpetual war between various kingdoms, with 6 eventually being formed by the time of the Tionese War. They were the Keldrath Alignment, the Injectru Confederation, the Thyron Worlds, the Jiminier Marches, the Kingdom of Kron, and the Honorable Union of Desvro and Tion. The latter had a very intense rivalry with the Kingdom of Kron, which makes sense given that the Honorable Union had the majority of the infrastructure that remained during the time of Zur and Zim's conquest within in that region. The kingdoms had been living under the ever-present menace of the Hutts since the time of Zin's death. The civilization had undergone technological and cultural stagnation. The term old blood is very appropriate here. Yet the destruction of the Krillin reaches made it very clear that the Tionese would soon become an extinct culture and people if something wasn't done about the Hutts. That time had come when scouts from an unknown power arrived within the cluster via the Permelian trade route and encountered Tionese ships. This was the initial contact between the Tion Cluster and the Republic, which at the time was made up of the human core, various core worlds that formed together in those very early days. Interactions were done primarily by the Tionese aristocrats and the Republic traders. Kind of the worst people to have first contact with, you ask me. After all, they have a habit of revealing way too much information. And that's exactly what happened. During the talks, the Tionese learned that the Republic had superior technology but lacked a powerful military, and so deemed it a wealthy but weak target, the kind ripe for conquest. But they were made very aware of their technological limitations. Unfortunately, they had a lot of money to spend, so it didn't take them long to start getting samples of Republic technology. It started with the Honorable Union first. And likely, when the other powers began to see the military buildup, they likely threatened to attack the Honorable Union for their own safety. But that is when knowledge of the Republic became very well known, which resulted in a loose coalition being formed between the 6 kingdoms. This was what they needed to get revenge against the Hutts, and that allowed for greater access to wealth and power. Once they had been the greatest empire in the galaxy, now reduced to nothing but rump states, they were desperate to be powerful again, to be feared again. But their actions didn't go unnoticed. On the world of Idox, which at this point was renamed Ossus, the Giant Order noticed the buildup of the Tionese war fleets, using reverse engineered Republican technology and attempted to warn the Republic. Since the time of the first Great Skirmish and the combined pasting that was given to Xander's Legion of the Tau, the Giant Order and Republic had been silent with each other. Very few within the Republic gave thought to the Order since that time, once more becoming a little more than myth or legend. Mystics that kept to themselves while the Republic dealt with the greater duty of governance of thousands of worlds within the core. This was a tidy arrangement, but because of this, when the Jedi returned to Coruscant to warn about the Tionese, the Republic merely ignored it, and I can't say without good reason. As far as the Republic knew, the Tionese were a primitive people who lived in that backwater. They weren't, nay, couldn't be a threat to them. It didn't matter how much they built up or reverse engineered. By the time they arrived, the Republic would have even greater defensive technologies, which would turn them away, if needed. Not only that, but one could imagine the level of suspicion cropped up towards the Jedi. After all, the Order hadn't been relevant for 500 years, so perhaps a few senators believed that this was a ploy for them to gain power within the government. Or maybe the Tionese were threatening Ossus, since the world was within the cluster itself, making it more of a personal danger than something that should worry the Republic. Regardless of the reason, the warnings were ignored. Yet the Jedi did not lose hope. They knew the threat that was coming. They saw it. Some within their number, having gone through the Tion Cluster in secret. They knew the numbers, knew the capabilities, had been watching for centuries, but it had only reached a point of concern now. As the numbers of ships grew greater than what was needed for defense, it only led to one conclusion. The Tionese were about to attack, and the Republic was vulnerable. Now, it is the duty of the Giant Order to serve the will of the Force. This means saving as many lives as possible, allowing the Force to guide them to where it needs them to be. The Tion Cluster was where the Giant needed to be at that moment. Even while the Republic sat twiddling its thumbs at the oncoming storm, the Jedi didn't. But they didn't go in with laser swords blazing and cutting off limbs or even using mind tricks to get their way. Instead, they approached the 6 states of the cluster and began to speak. They appealed to the people, to the ruling class, to anyone who would listen, trying to prevent this war from happening, speaking to their fears, their hopes, and aspirations, knowing that what they wanted wasn't power but safety. That how the Hutts had done such a heinous thing in the Krillin reaches, and they feared that it could happen to them also. This want for territory and power was nothing more than a desperate cry for help. They pleaded with the Tionese nobility to speak with the Republic, to join, to let the Republic keep them safe, even offering members of their own order to be on patrol in the world so that way Chinese people would be at ease. Yet these words would come to naught. Though no doubt many listened, it ends with nobility. Because while fear was definitely a motivator for this, there was also greed, lust for power. Darkseid had taken hold of them again, just as it had in the time of Zim.
We tried and failed. War is inevitable. Soon, Chinese warships will run down the Vermilion hyperlane and strike at the Republic. For a century, we pleaded, spoke truth to power, and for nothing. May the Force forgive and be with us all.
1,000 years. That's how long it took for the Tionese to rebuild themselves since first meeting the Republic. They had done everything right. Gathered technology, manpower, quietly and slowly regaining the strength that they had lost. Yet not the territory. For now, anyway. The Grim Reaches was dead space. And the Hutts, well, they were waiting for someone foolish enough to try to attack them via the Warrior's Trace. But the mistakes of the past were not theirs to repeat. Another would take it up in future millennia. In those final years, the Energy War had stopped with the warnings, with the attempt to prevent the inevitable, and withdrew once more to Ossus to contemplate their new role in the coming conflict. On that day, in 24,000 BBY, the Tionese fleets were launched, and what came with them was silence. So we've lost contact with every world along the Vermilion route.
Try again. It might be a communication malfunction.
I have, sir. 3 times.
Sir, contacts! Multiple of them! Unidentified warships in close range!
What? Get command on the line. Tell them we're under attack. We have to get the signal out.
It's too late!
The Republic had sown the wind, and so they reaped the whirlwind. Down the Vermilion trade routes, it only reinforced the thoughts of the Tionese as they met little resistance. Planetary defense forces were insufficient to stop the tide of warships that came in waves from the route. Abheen, Roche, Lantilles, and Tehran were the first worlds to fall before the Republic could mount a serious effort to construct their own war fleet. Yet even as the first messages finally made it back to the Republic, the efforts to construct a fleet were hampered. Raiders went throughout the nascent power, like carrion birds picking at a corpse that was not all the way dead yet. The repressed rage and fury of the Tionese people, the injustice they had suffered, and the humiliation of their denied destiny, they took it out on the Republic, on beings who had done nothing to them. Yet it was the Republic who had incidentally caused the deaths of untold millions in the Ash Worlds, and for that, the Tionese exacted a forgotten vengeance. Those raiders moved to Axum and Permelia, destroying the shipyards at both with a new weapon, pressure bombs, an insidious tool that was designed to release vast quantities of sheer pressure when detonated, not just causing widespread damage to base stations and shipyards, but buildings fell, and the intense pressure utterly crushing those affected into flattened images of themselves. Yet Axum and Permelia, the engineers on the shipyards, and the crews in their ships waiting to be launched to counter the Tionese were not the only ones who experienced this weapon. Al-Salkin and Coruscant, 2 of the most populated worlds at the time with untold billions, were subjected to these weapons as countless lives were lost in an attempt to break the Republic. This was a mistake of galactic proportions. Throughout galactic history, it is said that the Galactic Empire, the Rakata, the Hutts, were the most cruel, most evil, and devastating forces to have ever existed. But the truth is, they paled in comparison to the Galactic Republic in those early days. And this, the horror that was inflicted upon the nascent power, ignited a fire. A fire that the Sith, the Mandalorians, the CIS, and every power that came before or since has mistaken for weakness. It is a mere taste of what the Republic could become when pushed, when made to forget itself, when the monster awakens. From Corellia, Rindelli, and Humbrain, new warships were launched under the command of the Republic Navy, headquartered at the largest, oldest, and most secure shipyard, Brerost. This shipyard outstripped all the others. Even the might of Corellia paled in comparison to it at the time. And as the holocaust of Coruscant's devastation made their way to the headquarters, whatever strategy of defense the admirals held in their minds, whatever clever tactics or resolving this with words after the Chinese were beaten back, was over. This would no longer be a war.
They will pay for this. For every life lost on Coruscant, every world they have assaulted and conquered, the fleets are ready to move. And one way or another, the Tionese will be a distant memory in this galaxy. I swear it!
What had come before, the easy victories of the Tionese at this point, have been nothing but the soft gloves that were now coming off. New fleets began to meet the Tionese in the theater of space, the weapons lighting up the void like 2 mighty titans clashing as thousands of lives were lost with each fight. Their enemy had only reverse engineered Republic ship technology, but they didn't understand it. With their innovations being impressive, it didn't match the sheer might of the Republic's hulls. Offensives and counteroffensives were waged for nearly a century up and down the Vermilion trade route. They burned and reburned worlds, space, hulls, and manpower that littered the void and the madness of war. The promise of the Republic to be a union in which all were welcome had changed. As for every cannon, every bomb, every bullet, every weapon, down to the very eye teeth carved into the Tionese forces, yet Coruscant still bayed for retribution. It didn't matter how many war fleets from the cluster were destroyed, how many soldiers were killed and laid to waste on those worlds. The sheer industrial might of the Republic was being switched on. The shipyards destroyed and the opening engagements were rebuilt, and hundreds of new ships, thousands of eager men and women were sent into the theater of war. It had become so horrific that an entire region of space had been designated the Divide, which was part of the future User sector in the Mid-Rim. It was a place where Republic colonists had settled years before the Tionese War began, and now the place was under threat of destruction as the war waged on. The Republic fought viciously to protect it and act as a buffer zone to keep the enemy from reaching the core worlds again to disrupt its industrial capacity. Yet the Republic understood that a war was not just one about ships and weapons. It was also about intelligence. And though the Republic's industrial capacity would eventually win this war, only a fool enters such a conflict with a single plan. Information would eventually reach the Republic about the ancient war between the Hutts and the Tionese, how the warlord Zin had been defeated by them, desperation leading to this current conflict, and that the Hutts had built up to prepare for war should the two human powers ever form an alliance, an event that was very unlikely now. Republic agents were sent into Hutt space, successfully provoked them into opening a second front against the Tionese, as Hutt fleets were sent into the remains of the Krillin Reaches. The space itself had been used as a staging area and a depot for new ships, training crews on how to use ship systems. This also served as a point of resource extraction for the moons and asteroids. The Hutts once more scoured the Krillin Reaches, and the Tionese found themselves facing two staggeringly powerful enemies who wanted to annihilate their culture. It is darkest before the dawn, a common saying with a weight never truly realized. For nearly a century, the Tionese War had raged as the Republic had done whatever it could to survive and pushed back. It was an unstoppable force grinding against an object that seemed immovable. But there was movement. Every day, the Tionese were pushed back further and further, yet this bloodshed had become intolerable to all, but none more so than to the Force. The death tremors echoed through the galaxy until reaching Ossus, where the giant meditated, contemplated, and agonized over what to do, if they should let the Republic fall or intervene. It was only when signs indicated the Republic would become nothing less than the greater evil than the Tionese and the Hutts that the Giant Order finally made the decision. The will of the Force had revealed itself to them, and it would be this action that set the precedent for the future ones. After all, for all the wars that would come later, the Mandalorian Wars, the Clone Wars, and Order 66. From their ancient fortress world, the Giant Order launched their fires and headed to the Republic. They bypassed Tionese patrols and warships like lights in the void. They were unable to be stopped, even as they linked up with the Republic. Even while Ossus stood ready, thousands of Jedi, descendants from those who lived there, and students from various corners of the galaxy stood ready to defend their home. Once more, the Guardians of Light had come, and when they joined the Republic fleet, they took up the role of commander. Their insights began to carve deeper wounds into the Tionese forces, to crush them once and for all. For the first time in decades, the Republic began a forward momentum, pushing the Tionese back further and further, the territorial gains evaporating like water when faced with the shearing heat of the sun. With the Giant on the Republic's side, the Tionese stood no chance. This shift in circumstances was so stark that defeat was only a matter of time. The Tionese resorted to sneak attacks and suicide attacks, devastating isolated colonies within the Divide to buy themselves time. But this only served to enrage the Republic. The determination linked with the solid wall of the Jedi's own might made the unstoppable force an inevitable one. There was a reason that for 25,000 years, the Jedi and the Republic had been able to weather the worst the galaxy had thrown at them. Now the noose was tightening around the Tionese. Yet the sight of the sheer bulk of the Jedi and the Republic approaching the cluster caused the Hutts to withdraw. They fled back to their own empire, preparing their defenses for the other onslaught that was no doubt coming next. But many of the Hutts who were part of the Zim Wars still lived, and one human had scared them so completely. But when seeing what was coming, they realized their fear, that he was nothing but a drop in the ocean, and that drop had nearly destroyed them. As the Republic reached the Tionese cluster, the Jedi were only barely able to keep the bloodthirsty and enraged officers at bay. Yet, to their horror, they discovered that they might have arrived too late. But the Jedi had entered the war to save the Republic from itself, to stop it from becoming monsters. But a century without guidance and a desperate war for survival had left scars. And what happened next scared everyone. The Jedi, the Tionese, the Hutts, and even the Republic itself. As the Navy had done some reverse engineering of their own throughout the war. The pressure bombs had fallen into their hands, and now they had them in such quantities and scale that the Chinese could never even imagine, because they never had the industrial capacity to do it. Throughout the cluster, key Chinese worlds were pounded relentlessly. The death tremors affected every Jedi in the fleet, even those light years away on Ossus, as the Republic did what it would later try to do: eradication. Even Desvro was not spared from the bombardment, as the Republic made sure that the Chinese felt every bit of pain and heartache that the Republic had to suffer. This had stopped being a conventional war decades ago, as the Republic was allowed to stew in its hatred and anger. So bad was the bombardment that Desvro sent out calls for unconditional surrender. The Republic merely ignored them. They didn't care. They were committed to sterilizing the entire planet, the entire union if they had to, as a message to the rest of the cluster, to the Hutts, to the Outer Rim. This was the beast that the Tionese had awoken, and the Mandalorians were lucky to fight against a weakened and slumbering Republic. This would not be the last time their rage was shown, the brutality of what they were capable of, but this was the first. If it had not been for the Jedi present to stop the campaign, the dark side's hold would have never been broken, and like with the Jedi Order, it would keep trying with the Republic. In order with Desvro, the bombardment had been stopped, at least temporarily. It could restart at any moment. The Jedi stood their ground, the only power in the galaxy capable of stopping the Republic at that moment. On every flagship within the fleet, every critical vessel, there was a Jedi who stood between the Republic and the dark side. Each had the power to stop the order from being given to continue the bombardment, and there was nothing that could stop them in that moment. The lives of the Chinese people and the soul of the Republic hung in the balance. It was an abyss, a gaping maw that threatened to swallow everything and everyone in a crazed frenzy. Yet the Jedi did not blink. In that space, the Jedi struck a deal. While they would not serve the government, they would instead establish a network of watchmen to protect the Bermudan trade route from the Tionese and the Hutts, with a series of fortress worlds. These would be Ossus, Baling Minor, and Hashemet, the first fortress worlds in galactic history. This would be agreed to by the Tionese, while the Hutts stood back and watched, their mouths drying at the idea of Republic strongholds so close to their home territory. They suspected this would be the beginning stages of a new war, but one never came to the Hutts. At least not for the next 10,000 years. After the war had been resolved, the Republic took a step back, re-examined itself, and did not like what it saw. It had become a warmonger, a brutal power that it had wished to avoid being. So the next steps were foreseeable. Rather than keeping the vast military around, they disbanded it and sent the bulk of the forces to local sector governments, focusing on sector and system-based defense fleets, in an attempt to earn back the trust and the allegiance of the Jedi Order, and to live with themselves. As for the Tionese, this was the swan song of their attempt to become a galactic power. The Union would join the Republic shortly after the war as a member sector. Within a few centuries, so would the rest of the Tion Cluster, simply becoming another sector of the Republic. Once more, the dark side had been thwarted, but it was not over yet. For soon another incident would occur that would test the galaxy in far greater ways than anyone could ever imagine, when the worst impulses of the Republic would be fully indulged for 1,000 years.